There are certain places in the American West where the ground itself seems to hold on to what was buried there. Places where the violence of the past was so concentrated and the deaths so sudden that the dead appear never to have fully settled into the earth. Boothill Graveyard in Tombstone, Arizona is one of those places. It is a small, dusty cemetery on a rocky hillside just north of town, about 30 miles from the Mexican border, in the high desert of southeastern Arizona. The town was founded in 1879 by a prospector named Ed Schieffelin, who had been told by a fellow Army scout that the only rock he would find out there in those lonely hills would be his own tombstone. He found silver instead, and thousands of people followed him into the desert. At its peak, Tombstone had 110 saloons, 14 gambling halls, and a constant flow of cattle rustlers, gunmen, and outlaws. The San Francisco Examiner called the local cowboys the most reckless class of outlaws in that wild country, infinitely worse than the ordinary robber. People died in the streets, in saloons, and in two catastrophic fires, one in June 1881 when a cigar ignited a barrel of whiskey in the Arcade Saloon, and another in May 1882 that destroyed more than 100 businesses. More than 40 men burned alive in those fires, trapped in crowded saloons and brothels as the town burned around them. The town needed somewhere to bury its dead. In 1878, a graveyard was carved out of the hillside, originally called the Tombstone Cemetery. So many of the men buried there had died violently, suddenly, with their boots still on, that the pioneers gave it another name. They called it Boothill. At least 250 people are buried in that small, dusty plot of ground. Some estimates put the number closer to 300. Approximately 205 are named in surviving records. The rest lie in unmarked graves, their identities lost to time. Among the dead are some of the most famous names in the history of the American West. Marshal Fred White, the first lawman of Tombstone, accidentally shot on October 28, 1880, by a curly-billed brocius during a late-night shooting spree. He died 2 days later. Tom McLary, Frank McLary, and Billy Clanton, killed on October 26, 1881, in the most famous 30 seconds in Wild West history, the gunfight at the OK Corral. Their graves bear a single inscription: "Murdered on the streets of Tombstone." 5 men hanged on March 28, 1884, for the Bisbee Massacre. John Heath, dragged from his jail cell by a mob and lynched from a cottonwood tree. China Mary, a Chinese businesswoman who ran a general store and died of heart failure in 1906. And there are graves marked simply "Unknown." Miners, drifters, cowboys whose names were never written down. Men whose lives were compressed by the cemetery into a few words on a wooden marker. Hanged by mistake, shot by sheriff, killed by Indians. One such man was Johnny Blair, who died of smallpox at a camp a few miles from town. His friends would not touch the body. They threw a rope around his feet, dragged him behind a horse to the graveyard, and dropped him into a hole in the ground. No ceremony, no dignity, no one willing to come close enough to lower him in by hand. His grave sits alone, just past the edge of the cemetery, separated from the others, as if even in death the town did not want him near the rest of the dead. By 1884, a new cemetery was built elsewhere, and Boothill stopped accepting burials. The wooden markers rotted. Some were stolen by souvenir hunters. The desert crept in and reclaimed the land. It was not until the 1940s that the town began restoring what was left. By then, many graves had been lost entirely, and some of the markers that were replaced turned out to be fictitious, placed there to attract tourists rather than mark actual burials. Today, Boothill is one of Tombstone's most popular tourist attractions. There is no admission fee. It is a real cemetery. Visitors walk among the graves every day, reading the epitaphs, photographing the markers, standing where the Old West's most notorious outlaws and lawmen were laid to rest. But for more than a century, the people who visit this place have reported that the dead are not entirely at rest. One afternoon, a woman was walking through the graveyard when she felt a spider's web brush across her face. She stopped and looked around. There were no trees nearby, no structures that could hold a web. Nothing above her or beside her that could explain what she had felt. The sensation lingered, as if something had reached out and touched her as she passed. Something she could not see and could not identify. She was not near any particular grave. She was simply walking through the cemetery the way hundreds of visitors do every day, when something invisible made contact with her skin. Others have described similar encounters, the feeling of an invisible hand on their shoulder, their hair being pulled, a pressure against their back, as if someone was standing directly behind them, close enough to feel, though when they turn, there is no one there. These encounters seem to intensify near the most infamous graves, near the Clanton and McLaury plots. Visitors have also reported hearing voices among the graves during the day. Not conversations, not words that can be made out, just voices carried on the desert wind, sourceless and low, as if the cemetery itself were murmuring. At night, the sound of coyotes howling has been reported from inside the cemetery walls, even when no animals can be seen anywhere near the grounds. The graveyard closes after dark, but photographs taken through the fence at night frequently capture things that were not visible to the photographer at the time. Small animals have been spotted scurrying between the headstones, low to the ground, fast, vanishing before anyone can identify what they are. Shadow figures, dark and humanoid, have been glimpsed walking among the plots, only to disappear the moment someone turns to look directly at them. A local guide named George Self has collected photographs from visitors over the years, showing shadow men walking among the graves, captured by different people at different times, always the same dark shape, always gone before anyone could see it with their own eyes. But of all the things reported at Boothill, none is more specific or more chilling than what is said to happen on October 26. On that date, the anniversary of the gunfight at the OK Corral, visitors have reported seeing 3 men in cowboy attire standing near the Clanton and McLaury graves. They appear to be arguing. They do not respond when spoken to. They do not look up. They stand as if the gunfight that killed them is still being fought, a century and a half later, in a graveyard that holds their bones. Some say Billy Clanton's spirit rises from his grave on that date and walks toward Tombstone, vanishing at the cemetery gate. Others have reported seeing 3 men rise from the plots and walk together toward town, their figures dissolving into the desert light before they reach the fence. Electronic voice phenomenon recordings at Boothill have reportedly captured phrases that recur across different visits, recorded by different people at different times of year. Remember me. It wasn't fair. Tell them my name. 3 phrases spoken by voices that no one present could hear at the time, appearing only on the recordings. Some EVP sessions are said to have captured entire conversations, voices speaking about events from the 1880s, as if they had just happened, as if the speakers do not know that they are dead. One recording reportedly features a voice saying, "Tell them my name," near a row of graves marked unknown, as if the man buried there is still waiting for someone to figure out who he was. It is strange to consider that a place so small, so dry, so exposed to the Arizona sun could hold so much that refuses to be explained. But of all the things reported at Boothill, one photograph stands above the rest. A photograph that has never been explained. A photograph that, decades after it was taken, still draws investigators to a small graveyard in the Arizona desert. In 1996, a man named Terry Ike Clanton visited Boothill Graveyard with a friend in the early morning hours. Clanton is an actor, a cowboy poet, and a direct descendant of the Clanton family, the same family that fought the Erbs at the OK Corral in 1881. His own relative, Billy Clanton, is buried in the very cemetery where he stood that morning. He knew the ground. He knew its history, and the cemetery was empty. No other visitors, no staff, no one walking the paths. Clanton had brought his own authentic 1880s period clothing, and his friend wanted souvenir photographs of himself dressed in the old Western style, standing among the graves. Clanton took the photograph in black and white because his friend wanted the images to look like they were from the Old West. The film was taken to a local thrifty drugstore for development. No one tampered with it. When Clanton looked at the developed print, there was a figure standing behind his friend, just to the right, among the gravestones. Someone who had not been there when the shutter clicked. The figure was thin. It wore a dark hat. Face was difficult to make out. Some who have studied the image say it looks like a young man. Others say an old man. Some have even suggested an old woman. But what everyone notices first is the lower half of the body. It's not there. Bushes behind and around the figure are visible, but the figure itself appears to have no legs. It seems to rise from the ground or from a grave, as if only partially present in the world. The figure appears to be holding something. Clanton initially thought it was a tie. After closer examination, he concluded it was a knife, held in a vertical position, the tip just below the figure's right collar. If it is a knife, it is not held in a way that suggests threat. It is simply there, gripped vertically, as if the figure is carrying it through a cemetery at dawn, for reasons that belong to no one alive. But the most unsettling detail is not the figure itself, it is the light. Clanton's friend casts a shadow in the photograph. It falls back slightly to the right, exactly as it should in the morning light. The figure behind him, standing in the same light, casts no shadow at all. Something that appears to occupy space, that has form and edges, that seems to be standing upright, and yet produces no shadow on the ground beneath it. The figure appears on the negative. This is not an artifact of the printing process. Whatever was captured on that strip of black and white film, it was there when the shutter clicked. 2 weeks later, Clanton and his friend returned to Boothill to test what they had captured. They positioned 2 people in the same spots, one where his friend had stood, and one in the back position where the figure had appeared. The results were immediate and striking. The person standing in the back was clearly visible, legs and all. The bushes at Boothill are not thick enough to conceal a person's legs. A real person standing in that spot would be visible from the waist down. The original figure had no lower body whatsoever. The effect could not be reproduced, no matter how they arranged the shot. In October 2009, the Discovery Channel came to Tombstone. A series called Ghost Lab, hosted by brothers Brad and Barry Klinge, featured the Boothill photograph in its 2nd episode, broadcast on October 12th. The crew filmed at the graveyard with Clanton, setting up equipment in the same spots where the figure had appeared 13 years earlier. The investigation treated the image as credible evidence. and the episode brought the photograph to a national audience for the first time. Over the years, the image has been examined by paranormal experts around the world. None have been able to prove it is a fake. And the 1996 photograph was not the last. On April 11, 2006, a family visiting Tombstone from out of town walked through Boothill Graveyard. After looking through their photographs later, they noticed what appeared to be a humanoid figure standing among the graves in the distance. They stated there was no one in that area when the photo was taken. The image, when zoomed, appeared to show a figure partially obscured by desert vegetations, similar in posture to the 1996 photograph. Over the years, Boothill has accumulated more reported ghost photographs than perhaps any cemetery in America. A local guide named George Self has collected and published numerous examples sent to him by visitors. Orbs with internal structure, not just specks of dust floating in the air, dark plasma, shadowy masses that appear in photographs without any visible source. Vortexes, swirling formations, captured in mid-air with the graves and fences in sharp focus behind them. Shadow men, dark humanoid shapes, photographed walking among the headstones, appearing in photos taken by different people at different times, years apart, always in the same area of the cemetery, always gone before anyone could see them standing there. One woman, touring the cemetery, felt an irresistible pull toward the far end of the graveyard. She followed the instinct and found herself at the grave of Johnny Blair, the man dragged behind a horse and dropped into the ground with the rope still around his feet. Once there, she felt an overwhelming urge to shout like a cowboy riding into town. She shouted once, startled her companions, and left. She did not experience anything else. She believed the spirit of Johnny Blair had made her do it. Perhaps some of these encounters can be attributed to the power of suggestion. A visitor standing in a cemetery where hundreds of violent deaths are memorialized, in a town famous for its lawless past, may be primed to see and hear things that are not there. The desert heat, the wind, the isolation, the weight of the epitaphs. It is easy to feel something in a place like Boothill. But if that is the case, it does not explain the figure on the negative. It does not explain the missing shadow. And it does not explain why the same phenomena have been reported by different people, decades apart, who had no knowledge of what others had seen before them. Whether the figure in Clanton's 1996 photograph was a spirit, a person who went unnoticed, a photographic artifact, or something else entirely, has never been determined. The image appears on the negative. The figure has no shadow. It appears legless. It seems to hold a knife. No one has successfully demonstrated how the effect could have been achieved through trickery. And no one has proven that what the camera captured was something beyond the physical world. Some have suggested pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to find familiar patterns in random visual noise. Bushes, shadows, and overgrowth combining into something that resembles a person. But the dark hat, the apparent knife, the structured posture make this explanation difficult to reconcile with what the camera recorded. Others maintain that the photograph is a hoax, staged for publicity. Given the photographer's family connection to Tombstone's most famous conflict and his commercial interest in the town's paranormal reputation. Clanton has consistently denied this. The negative evidence and the failed restaging experiment have never been satisfactorily explained away. And those who have attempted to dismiss the image as a simple trick have not accounted for the absence of a shadow on the figure, a detail that would require a level of manipulation far beyond what a drugstore development could produce. The truth about what Terry Ike Clanton captured on film that morning in 1996 may never be known. Boothill Graveyard is open to the public. The gift shop sells ghost hunting equipment. Staff share their own paranormal experiences and point visitors toward the most haunted graves. The cemetery closes after dark, but people still come at night, cameras in hand, photographing through the fence, hoping to capture something that the daylight keeps hidden. What is known is that Boothill Graveyard holds the remains of more than 250 people who died violently, suddenly, and often alone. And what is also known is that for more than a century, the people who visit this place have reported seeing, hearing, and feeling things they cannot explain. Voices that come from nowhere, shadows that walk between the graves, touches from hands that are not there, and figures in their photographs that were not there when the shutter clicked. Boothill Graveyard remains a place where the line between the living and the dead seems as thin as the desert air itself, and where the question is not whether the dead are still there, but whether they ever truly left at all. That is all for tonight. If you want more true stories and chilling encounters like this one, subscribe to Stories After Dark, and we will be here waiting.